Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Boyographic, the show in which I, Matt the Gameboy, take you through the highs and lows of the Gameboy library, one cart at a time. This week, let's get ready to rumble! It's Heavyweight Championship Boxing. I'm not really much for sport. I know that might not come as a huge surprise as I make videos about Game Boy games in my spare time, but it's true. I like rugby, I like ice hockey, hell, I'd even go so far at this stage to say I like handball, but I don't really watch any of these things religiously. Sports movies, however, I can't get enough of. American football? Yep. Basketball? Hell yeah. I even watched Eddie the Eagle recently. But there is one movie franchise that I really love, and that's Rocky. It's a movie about boxing, but it's more about one man's challenge to make it. Something reflected in Sylvester Stallone's real-life story about how the movie got made. Despite how great the movies are though, Rocky was surprisingly absent from the list of licensed games that graced the NES and Game Boy. As well, Sega had the license and released a Rocky game on the Master System in 1987, which is an alright game, but naturally, its existence is completely overshadowed by Nintendo's own 1987 release of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, a game that would not only permeate through popular culture, but would also set the stage for boxing games that followed it, due to its tight controls, brilliant enemy tells, and of course, the notoriously difficult title fight against Tyson himself. But what if I told you, hidden right in plain sight on the Game Boy, a developer attempted to mash both Punch-Out! And Rocky together. Boxing on the Nintendo Game Boy was Tosei's attempt of bringing the world's boxing video games, movies, and the sport itself together on everyone's favourite handheld. How, you might ask? Well, by blatant disregard of both copyright law and likeness rights. The 1990 game was published by Tonkin House in Japan, and featured a whole host of boxers with very familiar names, such as Mike Tyson, Rocky's Star, and Aporo Food for the Western audiences, with the likes of Joe Ibuki and Iwi Akai for Japan, and John Wilde is, well, I presume Jimmy Wilde if Google's anything to go by, but you get the point. Naturally, when the game made its way over to the United States and was renamed to Heavyweight Championship Boxing, Activision, the game's Western publishers, were having none of it and renamed all the characters. That's not the only changes they made to the game, but we'll come back to that later. In Heavyweight Championship Boxing, you pick one of 6 fighters and must battle your way through 6 fights, defeating all the other boxers in the selectable roster and a final boxer known as the Hitman in the West and Mr. Tonkin in the original Japanese release. Fighting takes place in a large ring, initially in a warp top-down perspective, before switching to a first-person perspective for the actual boxing. Naturally, both of these perspectives take inspiration from Nintendo's various Punch-Out! Games. You've probably already noticed, but there are a ton of meters for the player to keep track of here. The L and R meter on the left are naturally the power charges in a punch thrown by either your left or right fist, which are mapped to the A and B buttons respectively. By pressing either of these buttons, you can land a blow on your opponent. By pressing up or down with either of these buttons, you can throw a hook or an uppercut. Pressing up or down without a punch will allow you to block an opponent's blows, and naturally, you can sidestep by pressing left or right on the D-pad. The other meters around the screen are related to your fighter's stamina and health. Stamina, the big bar in the middle, is used to keep you going through a fight. You'll use it up by throwing punches and defending yourself, but it also plays a crucial role to the meter on the right, your health bar. Each successful blow your opponent lands means your health will tick down incrementally, depending on the strength of their punches. If this bar gets emptied, an opponent can knock you down, resulting in a count to 10 that sees you bashing buttons to drain your stamina bar to get back up again. Generally speaking, if you knock down twice, you're pretty much a goner. You can choose to attempt to fill both your health and stamina bars while in the top-down ring, however. Health regenerates over time by draining your stamina bar out of the fight, while the stamina can be regained by clinching with an opponent, which I couldn't really figure out how to do consistently. If this wasn't enough to keep track of, the game also takes you through the full 12 rounds if you let it, meaning each round is 3 minutes long. So naturally, you can either win on points or a knockout. This can all feel a little bit overwhelming to begin with, But as you get into the later bouts, most of this becomes irrelevant. You see, later fights cannot simply be won by flailing aimlessly at your opponent. Instead, you need to let the gauges on your left and right fist build up until your fists begin to flash and you can deliver a super punch. A move that instantly, regardless of how much health they have, knocks your opponent on his ass and down for the count. However, the same move can be pulled off by your opponent and often will be by the hitman on you. While landing this type of blow is generally exciting, it can be tricky to accomplish as your opponent has no tells. You cannot see what kind of punches they'll throw or if they'll block, meaning your best bet is to hold the direction to get out of the first person mode, then instantly re-engage in the fight and throw a super punch, hoping you're quick enough to land it. I cannot stress enough that if you want to beat this game, you'll need to learn how to land these kinds of punches. The hitman will land them so often in the last bout that your stamina will drain quicker than you can land punches, and in all honesty, regular blows are pretty much ineffective against him. While this is clearly a huge issue, the type of punches you choose to map to the super punch is up to you as a player. Yes, believe it or not, while the last fight does almost render it obsolete, there is a degree of character customization in the game. Not only do you pick your super punch, but at the beginning of the game, you get to spec your boxer's strength, stamina, and health, as well as each boxer having a preferred fist. Between bouts, you'll earn more points and be able to raise and lower these bars depending on how you prefer to play. My advice: level out power and stamina ASAP. They'll get you through the initial fights the quickest, as it's the later stages you're going to have the most trouble with. Why will you end up replaying these first fights? Well, because the game has limited continues. 3 in the Japanese version, but only 1 continue per bout in the American release, which is a massive pain in the ass. It means you can come very close to beating the game, and a super punch will land you right back where you started, which really sucks. As mentioned, there are a few more minor changes in the US release, but the others aren't as big. The bunny girl who holds up the round cards loses her ears in the States, and naturally, any mention of Tonkin House is stripped from the game and replaced with the Activision logo. Also, the very confusing screen after the title card is edited in the American version to remove the illusion that you can adjust the number of time and rounds. You can't. This is something that can only be done in the game's 2-player mode, which isn't actually that bad. None of these changes are a big deal, but something worth pointing out nonetheless. What is a big deal though is the game's score. Seriously, there isn't much music in this title, but the score that's there is incredible. The main fighting theme almost reminds me of something out of Ninja Gaiden. Unfortunately though, no composer is credited with the work here, so if you know, please let me know in the comments down below. There's not a lot more to say about boxing. It's a game with an incredible amount of depth, especially for a Tosei Gameboy title. However, it's the illusion of this meter management and the character progression that, once stripped bare in the final bout, really makes you realise that these are all surface level stats, and it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Especially as the lack of continues and the hitman's power punches are meant to prolong the length of the game rather than heighten the player's enjoyment. The character portraits in the game also leave a lot to be desired, as, well, they're all simply the same fighter sprite, with modifications to the face and adjustments in skin tone. Despite these flaws though, you can have a lot of fun with this game for sure. Just don't bend over backwards to get a copy. While you'll feel as elated as a champion in the first few rounds, you'll soon know what it feels like to be sauntering around the back of the ring in disappointment. Heavyweight championship boxing has some great ideas and a lot of charm. I mean, in what other game does the crowd throw things at you if you don't box? However, the things this game blatantly didn't plagiarise from Punch-Out are the things that matter. If the enemies had their own tells and some of the controls were a little more intuitive, then I honestly believe this game could have been a real contender. And that brings me to the end of another Boyographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, like and subscribe, let me know in the comments down below, and check out some more of our Game Boy videos. You can also find me on Twitter at Gameboy and Instagram at the same place, and stuff will be happening very, very soon. But until then, be sure to game on.